Fantastic. So that recording will be up on our YouTube channel for people to watch after the session, but you'll only be able to see the panelists and those who are speaking on the webinar. I just wanted to caveat this session today with a little bit of a trigger warning. Due to the nature of the session today, you may hear some language around mental health, racism, threats of violence and hate, which some people may find offensive. So without further ado, I'm just going to quickly run through who we are. Hopefully you know, since you've joined us today. We are NCVO. NCVO is the membership body for charities in England. We champion the voluntary sector and volunteering because they're essential for a better society. And we've currently got over 17,000 members across England who range from very big household name charities to the smallest community groups. And we'd love you to join us. So we do have a special offer on for Small Charity Week, and Chanel will put some details of that in the chat. We've got a special discount code. So usually our membership is free for those with an income of under £30,000, but we've extended that to £50,000 for the month of June. So June is nearly over, so get in there and get your NCVO membership, which will be free for the year. So just a little bit about what you get when you join NCVO: information, templates, tools and resources, events like this, free member networking events, discounts from our trusted suppliers in areas like HR and digital, 30% discount on our training, and policy and research updates as well. And I just realized I forgot to mention that the closed captions should be on, they should be enabled, and you should be able to turn those on at the bottom of your screen and change the size of those as well if you need. So I'm going to hand over now to Jade.
Thank you so much, Amy. It's so lovely to be here. And happy Small Charity Week, everybody. Welcome to this incredibly important webinar. My name is Jade Staiano. My pronouns are she, her. I lead the marketing and communications team here at Media Trust, as well as being a social media trainer as well. And I am delighted to have you all here with us. At Media Trust, we believe it's by giving everyone a voice that we get to a more equal society. And that's why we're working with hundreds of charities to strengthen their storytelling skills, advocacy, campaigning, press engagement, social media. We do this through media, communications and digital skills training, delivered with our creative and media industry partners, and by matching media industry volunteers looking to give back with charities that need all sorts of different comms support. So you can check that out on our website. On to today's session. As many of you know, the landscape for charities today is increasingly complex and challenging. With the rise of social media, 24-hour news cycle, we're more visible than ever before. And while this visibility is essential for raising awareness and funds, it also exposes us to heightened security and unfortunately, scrutiny, and unfortunately negative attention. The current political climate in the UK has been marked by this increasing polarisation and adds another layer of complexity. And where we might have been able to have reasonable discussions, now we have battlegrounds for conflicting ideologies, making our work more vulnerable to attack than ever. This environment can be incredibly stressful for those who are working in the sector, disheartening for those of us committed to making a positive change. But this morning, we'll be hearing some strategies to help me navigate this. We'll be covering practical tools for managing online negativity, maintaining your organisation's reputation, and protecting the mental well-being of your team, because it's crucial to remember that our well-being and the well-being of our team is so important. Dealing with online negativity can take a toll, and it's vital to have mechanisms in place for supporting our volunteers, our staff, our ambassadors. And we have an excellent lineup of speakers today who are going to be sharing their insights and experiences. I'm looking forward to getting involved in some discussion at the end with your Q&As as well. So we have Becky Slack. Sorry, next slide, please. We have Becky Slack, who is co-director of strategic communications agency Agenda. She has over 27 years of experience in media and comms, including 20 in the charity sector. She works as a communication strategist, fundraiser, journalist, and media advisor. We have Heather Patterson, who's the CEO of Say It, Lara Parazotto, executive director at Migrant Democracy Project, and pleased to say that she took part in the Media Trust Stronger Voices program recently, and Sonia Kara, founder of Tala Thrive. So all with incredible insights and stories to share with us today. We'd love to see you use that Q&A function and upvote questions if you see them that you would like us to answer at the end. So introducing just a couple of polls. We'd love to get a sense of who is in the room. So what is your experience of opposition towards your charity? What has been your experience of opposition towards your charity? If you wouldn't mind launching that poll, that would be great. We'll just give it a moment to see people voting. Excellent. Maybe we could share the answer to that now. So do you have any experience of serious opposition online? 38% saying yes and 62% saying no. I think that's really interesting split of people who've actually experienced it and not. And hopefully today you'll actually be prepared, because we should all be kind of prepared for some of these things, even if we haven't experienced them already. And then the second poll, how confident do you feel about responding when you face opposition? Perhaps we could share that poll now. So you can answer very confident, confident, and then towards the end, unconfident, very unconfident, or maybe not applicable. So how confident are you in dealing with opposition online, particularly in public spaces? Just give a minute or so for people to respond to that. Excellent. Maybe we can share the results there. Okay, we've got a good mix, neither unconfident or confident. Some people feeling very confident, maybe because you've experienced it before and have got some strategies to cope, and then unconfident. Well, hopefully we'll really give you some really good things to think about today, and a starting point to think about your charity and how you can prepare for if you do receive negativity online. But now I am thrilled to be handing over to Becky Slack. I should be taking lots of notes, but you will get a copy of these slides afterwards. So yeah, over to you, Becky.
Thank you very much. Can you open my first slide, please? So yes, thank you for the excellent introduction, Jade. It made me feel really old when I think about the fact that I've got almost 30 years experience in this. It doesn't seem like 2 minutes since I joined the sector. But yes, I have worked across a multitude of different comms crises and dealt with all kinds of opposition on and offline. So I'm hoping to share some of that with you today. And I'm very happy to be participating in Small Charity Week. We've worked with lots of small charities over the years. So it's really, it's a real pleasure to be able to share some of our insights with you today. Next slide, please. So the way that I've structured it, we've got 10 minutes to get through quite a lot. So what I thought would be most helpful for you would be to give you a bit of a template for a crisis comms plan that you can apply to online opposition, offline opposition, difficult questions from journalists, however that opposition and criticism may come across. So I think the slides are going to be made available to you afterwards. Next slide, please. So I'm going to talk through 3 areas of crisis comms: planning, implementation, and follow-up. And because there's so many different organizations here, I will bring in some of the experiences that I've had, but I'm hoping that the way the slides are structured will make them relevant to as many different organizations as possible. Next slide, please. Okay, so if there's one message that I would like you to take away from today, and that is planning is absolutely essential. I know that 62% of you said that you've never faced any opposition or serious opposition, but that is not to say that you won't. And when you are in the middle of one of those moments, it's stressful, it's emotional, and you don't do your best thinking in those moments. So my number one recommendation is to plan. I mean, there's a multitude of analogies that I could refer to. Fail to plan, plan to fail. Forewarned is forearmed. It's crisis comms planning is an insurance policy for you. So it's much better to have it in place and not need it than not to have it in place and then you do need it. There are three sort of core elements to planning. One is scenario planning. Two is roles and responsibilities, like who is responsible for what, why, and when. And the third one is around messaging. And so just very briefly, with scenario planning, think about the worst case scenario that may happen. Think about all the different worst case scenarios that may happen and plan them through. Who would need to respond? How quickly would you need to respond? Are there different audiences that would need different sets of information? To give you a sense of the different types of opposition that we've worked with clients on, we've had journalists asking very difficult questions. We've had spokespeople sending drunken tweets on a Friday night and tagging journalists in them and criticising them, which has caused a bit of a stink. We've had a diplomatic row between two countries that had previously been at war, and if we didn't handle it properly, the chances were that they may go back to war, which was a bit stressful. We've had board members falling out and instigating online attacks against other members of the team. And we've dealt with disinformation that has actually been really harmful and put lives at risk. So there's, no one wants to have to deal with these things. No one wants to have to think about these things, but planning for them and thinking them through in the cold light of day, not in the heat of the moment, is absolutely the way to go. And this is also where training is really important, because the more your staff are trained to understand how social media works, understand how best to respond to different types of challenges, the better they are prepared. And then with messaging, again, we can talk about this a bit later on because it will vary depending on the organisation. But the three things that you really need to think about are demonstrating care, whether that's for the person who has raised whatever issue it is, or whether it's your team or your beneficiaries, the communities that you serve. You want to demonstrate control of the situation, and then also credibility and authority. Next slide, please. So implementation, monitoring is really important, keeping a track of what's being said so you can see whether things are beginning to heat up and you can respond quickly, always a good thing, and do it across channel as well. So it's not just about Instagram or TikTok. Look across all of your channels, look at what donors are saying to you, look at what your volunteers are saying, see what patterns might be emerging. When you do decide to respond, that's when you refine your messaging that you've already planned and you've already drafted. But not everybody is going to need a response. If people are trolling you, sometimes it's best just to ignore them. There's the phrase starve the troll, which is an important one. That said, sometimes you do need to respond. We had a situation with some disinformation that was mentioned, some disinformation that was being shared recently, and it was an outright lie, and it was very harmful and very dangerous to the teams on the ground. And we had to make a decision. Do we contact the person directly who was sharing that particular, who'd shared that particular meme? Did we call them out online? Did we hide the post? Did we use allies to offer some support? It was a tricky one because we needed to make sure that the person didn't lose face. I don't know if you know anything about psychology, but telling people that they're wrong normally makes them dig their heels in. And so we had to think very carefully about how to respond to that particular post. And in the end, what we did was we recruited some allies who commented on the post and said how irresponsible it was, and that for somebody who supposedly cared about this particular issue, they were actually putting lives at risk. And this individual did take the post down, thankfully. But they had 250,000 followers and it had been reshared 750 times. So it was a bit of a stressful situation, but luckily we managed to get that one under control. And internal comms is really important. So making sure that your teams are talking to each other, sharing information between each other, and that includes board to senior management level and lower down the food chain. And self-care is particularly important. I think some of the case studies might touch upon this later on, but it's really important to make sure that you've not just got one person that's dealing with all of this, because it can be overwhelming and bad for their mental health. If people are criticizing an individual online, then make sure that individual doesn't have anything to do with the response, and they stay away from seeing the feedback. And offer mental health support along the way. I can't emphasize that enough. I think sometimes, particularly as comms professionals on the front line, we sometimes neglect our own mental health. And so I really want to advocate to make sure that the right support mechanisms are in place. Next slide, please. And follow up. Lots of people forget to do this, but actually this is the other sort of really important strand of responding to opposition. And this involves, as you are monitoring all of the activity that's going online, analysing it, understanding it. Could something have been prevented? What could you do differently next time to stop this opposition from happening, stop the crisis from emerging? Then you need to go and look at amending your systems and processes. Do you need to update your risk register? Do you need to give more training to the staff? And then importantly, again, subject to what the particular issue is, you may want to feedback to different audiences. So that's obviously crucial within the team to make sure that you're feeding back to your board, any of your comms people, any of your volunteers, important partners and suppliers. You definitely want to feed back to the communities you serve, because particularly if something's been happening online, chances are that they have seen the opposition, and they may be worried or afraid about what it may mean for them in their own personal circumstances. And then also feedback to donors, so that you can, if trust and confidence in your work has been damaged in any way by what has happened, you need to then go through a process of rebuilding that trust and confidence. And so regular, transparent communication is key in all directions. And actually, this isn't just something, the feedback element isn't something that should wait until the end. This is something that should happen throughout, because actually those regular, transparent communications can actually contribute to diffusing a situation. And I'm on exactly 10 minutes, so I was on time. It was a little bit of a rush, but I hope that those slides will give you a kind of overview of the different types of the different elements of a crisis comms plan. And I'm very happy to chat through any of them in more detail at a later date. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Becky. Yes, do pop your questions in to the chat, to the Q&A button, and then we can take those questions on later. I'm going to hand over to Heather now. Heather.
Thank you, and thank you, Becky. So yeah, as said, I'm Heather. I'm the Chief Exec at Say It. My pronouns are she, her. And for anyone who would benefit from a visual description, I'm a white woman with glasses, tassus, and ginger hair, wearing a floral summer dress, currently melting in the heat. If I can go to my first slide, please. So just talking from our experiences at Say It. So Say It was founded back in '99, and we've been supporting LGBTQ plus young people in the region for 25 years now. So we've seen the changes that have taken place in the sector during that time. We provide group and one-to-one support for young people. We do outreach work in schools, colleges, and other youth spaces. We also support parents and carers and provide training for professionals as well. So our work is quite broad. We also co-host Sheffield's LGBTQ plus multi-agency network, and we lead on sort of multiple citywide awareness events through the year. Back in October 22, recognising the increasingly anti-LGBTQ plus climate and sort of issues with the underreporting of hate crime, we became a third-party hate crime reporting centre, so that for people who, for any reason, experience barriers in reporting directly to the police, they can make that report to us. But back when we were founded, we worked in a time predating the Equality Act, sort of when Section 28 was still in force. So there wasn't any LGBTQ plus education in schools. We didn't have an equal age of consent or equal marriage. So we started working in an environment where we were facing opposition. But from that point on, for probably the first 20 years of our existence, we were seeing progress and advances in equality and moving forward. However, for us over the past 5 or 6 years, we've seen reversal of that. We've seen rise in anti-LGBT hostility again, sort of from all quarters, from the media, from the government, and from sort of organised campaign groups attacking our hard-won rights and the work that we're doing. We can go to my next slide. So just about me, I've also been working in the sector for 25 years in a variety of different roles, not all at SAIT, lots of public facing roles. And over the years, I've built up quite a large online platform. Back in the day, I very briefly wrote the top global news and politics blog on MySpace, which probably ages me, and now have over 125,000 followers on Twitter, which is a, shall we say, interesting space at the moment to have a presence in. And I'm saying that not just as sort of blatant self-promotion, but that in the current climate, we need to consider not just our organisations, but the people within our organisations and how they're impacted. You know, it's generally necessary for those, particularly in sort of senior roles or public-facing roles, to have a certain level of visibility. And, you know, it's important to build our reach, and our online audience can be really important in doing that for fundraising, for campaigning, and the essential work of our organisation. So it's not an option to just switch it off and not have a presence in online spaces, but it also exposes us to a lot of risk. On a personal level, I stopped counting the number of death threats I received after my 400th. So I just know it's over 400. And I must point out that the sort of majority of those have been either outside or predating SAIT, which means that, fingers crossed, the protective factors that we have in place as an organisation appear to be working. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. If I can go to the next slide. So just looking at what the climate is like at the moment for LGBT, I think you probably realise from what's been said already that it's not great. This chart shows the current UK ranking in ILGA's Rainbow Europe report, which every year ranks the legal and policy situation for people in 49 countries across Europe. And until 2015, the UK was consistently number 1 on that list, and we're now down at number 17. So you can see how rapid that decline has been. The quote there is from the UN and gender and sexual identity expert, Victor Madrigal-Borlos, following his inspection visit to the UK, expressing his concern about the rapid rise in hate crime and growing anti-LGBT hostility. And he's right to be concerned. In the past 5 years, there's been 112% rise in reported hate crimes targeting sexuality, and 186% against trans people. And we know, and that's just reported figures, and we know that these are things which are massively underreported. And most tragically, that article there from the Good Law Project from just this week shows the increase in deaths that we've seen of trans young people as a result of some of those legislative and policy attacks on sort of trans people and trans healthcare. So it's a really tough climate. If we go to the next slide, we just take a look at sort of where all of this is coming from. We can see the massive increases in anti-LGBT and specifically anti-trans reporting in the media. There hasn't been a single day now in the past 6 years without an anti-trans article in the mainstream press. And when I say not a single day, I mean not a single day. Christmas Day, the day the Queen died, when there was wall-to-wall coverage of very little else, they still managed to squeeze in a couple of transphobic articles. So it's been an absolute obsession. We also see some online accounts with very large followings pushing those anti-LGBT narratives and misinformation and abuse, and their sort of armies of followers piling on anyone who dares to question that, or even to just exist as a queer person in those spaces, and the platforms themselves doing generally very little to challenge that abuse, and in some cases, sadly, actively encouraging it. And for the, when we look at that for the press and the media platforms, they don't care about us. We're just clickbait. We're advertising revenue. And so they don't have any incentive to meaningfully challenge that. For those engaging in anti-LGBT culture wars in the political world, and I'm being very careful here because I'm aware we're in a pre-election period, so not referencing any individuals or parties specifically, but there's a clear advantage to some people if we're kept arguing about which toilet someone should use rather than the cost of living crisis or NHS waiting lists or the climate or anything else like that. So from the sort of media and government angles, they've got skin in the game in not addressing these issues, because actually us being attacked is currently helpful for them. If we go to the next slide, just looking at how this manifests specifically within the voluntary sector. Obviously, we've seen a raft of sort of legislative and policy produced in recent months, largely currently in draft and consultation stage. There's not too much, thankfully, that has passed into law, but a lot regarding sort of LGBT legal recognition, education, health, which are areas that, all areas that we work in. And we've seen not just the organisations themselves, as I say, facing objections, and to be really clear, because it always gets that down to a sort of argument about free speech and debate. I think disagreement and debate is really helpful. I don't think anyone, I don't expect everyone to agree with our position. Having different positions is fine, but what we've seen goes far beyond that. We've seen targeted abuse, like I say, not just at the organisations themselves, but also towards individuals working within the sector. We've also seen a number of orchestrated campaigns targeting our funders, which is really challenging. So before the pandemic, TUC figures showed that LGBT organisations received just 4 pence in every £100 of voluntary sector income. Half of that went in London, and half of that halved again during the pandemic. So if you're working in the LGBT sector, we get about 1 or 2 pence in every £100. And we're now operating in a sector where, as a result of the current climate, we're, like everyone, constantly needing to do more with less. And while we're doing that, we've got organised campaign groups targeting our funders and attacking the little that we do have. And then alongside that, we've got all these various consultations, media attacks, legal challenges that are all taking away capacity from us when it's already stretched to the limit. So if we go to the next slide, I've obviously touched on this already, the impact of that. Obviously all of this combined has a big impact on our organisations, but we've seen some of the organisations in our sector closing down helplines because they've just been swamped with abusive phone calls, shutting down their social media and just deleting their social media altogether because it's no longer manageable with the amount of abuse that they've got. In some cases, we've had to just change how we do things. So somewhere which we previously would have done press releases and shouted about and celebrated, and we'd really like to do, but we've decided not to do that to avoid being targeted by anti-LGBT groups. Just as one example, we were asked a little while back, obviously we work with LGBT young people, and a local school asked if we'd come in and do a drag queen story time event, which would have been, a really nice, fun activity. But knowing how those events are targeted, we just said we just can't risk doing that. And so instead we did a little small book presentation to their school library and did that instead. So it altered the way that we were able to work and stopped us from doing a really nice positive event. Across the sector, we're seeing a lot of staff suffering burnout, the mental health impacts. Obviously for our sector, we're generally by and for organisations. So those attacks on our organisations are not just on our place of work, but they impact us personally. And that's increasing our staff turnover, and which obviously impacts our costs and our capacities alongside everything else, but also takes away that knowledge, that knowledge and experience that we have within our teams. We have additional costs that we're incurring, sort of providing additional security at events, or for us, we now provide transport for a lot of our young people to access services because they no longer feel safe accessing public transport. So there's financial implications to all of these. And ultimately, all of this affects the outcomes and impact of our work. So if, like for us, our goal is to improve the mental well-being of X number of people, but those people are also facing all of those challenges of existing in this climate, and the sector that support them is also under attack. Achieving those outcomes is more difficult, which is obviously an issue because we want to do the best to support our service users and the people that we're, as a charity, we exist to support, but also because in the voluntary sector, many of us are reliant on grant funding. We've got to meet our monitoring and funding requirements and deliver those outcomes as conditions of our funding. So the things that are making that more difficult, again, have financial impacts. And if we just go to our final slide, and now I've obviously focused on quite a lot of negatives there, and I do want to say that there's lots of great, wonderful things happening in the sector as well, but obviously this specific presentation has been about the challenges. But I do want to end on a sort of more positive note, not depress everyone too much, and look at some of the things that we can do and that we are doing to address some of these challenges. And these are just thinking about the approaches that we've taken, so are not in any way exhaustive, otherwise we would have fixed all of these issues already and hate would no longer exist. But the way that we've approached it is to try and be as balanced as we can. So to be aware of those risks and to make adjustments to how we deliver our work if we need to, but not to stop it from delivering our work. So like where we said, oh, we're gonna still run that activity, but it's not worth doing the big press release about it, but we'll still deliver the service. Obviously, safeguarding and welfare need to be the absolute priority in everything that we do. And I know we always think about our service users, but we need to make sure that we're thinking about our staff and our volunteers and the impact it has on them as well. And say it's something that we've done is we now have a counselling offer available for all of our staff. And obviously there's a cost to that because we use private counsellors, but it's a lower cost than the cost of replacing and recruiting and training new staff. And we've started including that as part of the staffing costs in our bids to funders. As just going, that is something we now need to just apply across the board to make sure that our teams can look after themselves to be able to look after other people. Like Becky said, thinking about things in advance and the planning is really, really important, so that you're not caught off guard and not knowing what to do in the moment. I've spent a lot of my time over the past year or so sat in risk management meetings, making plans for what we'll do if protesters turn up to one of our events, or if we're subject to a social media pile-on, or someone makes a legal challenge against us or plasters misinformation about us all over the front page of the Mail. So we've got plans in place for what we do in those situations. With social media, where we do encounter hate speech and abuse, our policy is that we block and we don't directly engage with it at all. Or if there is misinformation being spread, we'll share the accurate information from our account, but without directly interacting with the anti-LGBT accounts, so that we're not wasting our time arguing with them or risking a greater pile-on from their followers or boosting their engagement. And making sure that we're not doing any of those things in isolation. It's been really, really useful to speak to other organisations about how they're handling situations, what policies and resources that they have, and sharing these with each other so that we share the load and we minimise the impact on all of our resources. And then finally, while it might seem counterintuitive to think of the opportunities presented by this, just like COVID with all its challenges gave us all the skills of remote working and using new technologies and doing webinars like we are now, these attacks and uncertainties that we're facing at the moment mean that more people are discussing LGBT issues and being aware of the work that we're doing. they're also becoming aware of maybe their lack of knowledge in the area and coming to us for training, which is something that provides an income for our service. Other people are seeing these attacks and asking what they can do to help. So we're forming new partnerships, getting new volunteers, getting new donations. So there are positives that we can draw out of this as well. But it is really difficult at the moment. We know that, but I do hope that, you know, and I hold on to that hope that we'll come out of the other side of this stronger. And I've probably gone slightly over my 10 minutes, so I'll stop there. And with that, thank you very much, and I'll hand over to Laura from Migrant Democracy Project.
Thank you so much. That was really powerful to hear, and a lot of similarities as well. So hi everyone, my name is Lara. I am the Executive Director of Migrant Democracy Project. And we are a very small organization, which comes with a lot of challenges. So I'm the executive director, I'm the organizer, I'm the HR, I am the media person, whatever I need to be on that day. But it's been really helpful because we were part of the Media Trust's Stronger Voices program, which has been really insightful and has given us some really good tips and tricks on how to deal with media. So we campaign for the extension of the right to vote to every resident or every migrant across the UK, no matter where they are from. And that, of course, comes with many challenges because, as many of you see every day, migration is rarely talked about positively. It's talked about a lot, but often with a very negative frame. And we've been on both sides of media, both on that reactive side of seeing attacks on our community members, seeing disinformation, but also trying to more proactively campaign for the extension of the right to vote for all. And that's something that we try to remind people of, that we're talking about democracy, we're talking about principles of participation, of empowerment, and that vote should be for everyone. However, we're not against the word migrant. I am very proud. I am a migrant. I'm very proud of the word migrant. But of course, sometimes with just mentioning that word to a politician or to a journalist can get them to become very scared of what our campaign is or what our organization does. However, at the end of the day, we are campaigning for migrants to have political participation, to have political representation in the UK through the vote and through also training up to get elected and also registering to vote in important elections like we have now. And our hope is that with this participation, we can actively build a fairer immigration system for all of us. So next slide, please. So as I said, when we are thinking about the media, we have a lot of the reactive attacks from people on social media, but also from journalists themselves. So on social media, we often, when we post that we've done, for example, a voter registration drive, or that we're asking people to write to their MPs or write to their candidates asking for the right to vote to be extended for all, every now and again, we do get a lot of attention from the far right. And that can go two ways. Often we do ignore it. If it's just purely horrific xenophobic attacks, we will block accounts, we will not interact with them, and let that be. However, there are opportunities sometimes where the comments that are being made do give us a ground to correct and to provide the information that's actually relevant to our community members. But we, at least internally, we tend not to like retweet or quote retweet or reply to that account, because as was just said, we don't want to give too much attention to that. But sometimes it is helpful to like take a screenshot of a comment and then provide the actual information about it. So for example, we've done we're campaigning for the extension of the right to vote, and sometimes we've had people say, "Oh, I'll never let any migrant vote in the UK," which fortunately that's already not true, because there are Commonwealth citizens who can vote in every election and EU citizens who can vote at least in local elections. So sometimes there are some comments that give us the opportunity to have a little bit of an exciting, fun interaction on social media, so that at least gets more attraction from potential journalists or other community members that are excited to find out that they have that right to vote. And also then we have a lot of we need to do the more proactive side of things, of actually getting journalists to care about our work, because even though there's a lot of attention on migration, sometimes we see coming up on newsletters that ex-journalist is asking for comments on the Rwanda policy, or on the increase in the cost of the visa fees. So it's very rare that we have journalists actively interested in our work about extending the right to vote. So we do have to find angles to jump in and talk about the issue that we're campaigning for. But then that poses its own challenges. So I've had interactions with journalists where were quite hostile, especially on live interviews, where they would be asking, well, but why should migrants have the right to vote in the UK? They're not committed to the UK. They're not from here. Why don't they just go and campaign for political change where they're from? Or would actively ask questions about my own country, like, oh, but I'm from Brazil, but does Brazil allow every resident to have the right to vote? And often I would get into a very strong debate with the journalist and miss out on the opportunity to actually get through our points about our campaign. And it's, I don't know, maybe not naively so, I imagine that at least with journalists we would have that opportunity to have a fair debate, but as many of you know by now, you have to find ways to actually get your point across, because the journalists themselves are going to be a bit hostile. However, where we keep coming back to is we keep mentioning the point that the migrant communities that we work with are our residents. They live in the UK, they work in the UK, they pay taxes, they have hobbies, they have partners, they spend day-to-day life living just like everyone else, just like the British-born counterpart. They're interested in the schools, they're interested in public transport, in the hospitals. Migrants are not only interested in immigration policy, although of course they are. Migrants are part of our community and are interested in everything that happens under the democratic system, under the political system. So we actively want to participate in that. And we keep going back to those core values of democracy, of participation, of integration, and sometimes try to turn some sayings against those that are trying to use against us. So things like, migrants need to integrate first. And it's like, well, sure, we need to integrate, but without the right to vote, that integration can only go so far. Or even around Brexit, like, oh, Brexit was going to be creating this global Britain. Again, sure, if we're gonna have global Britain, then that active right to participate in Britain as a global Britain needs to be for everyone. And sometimes that kind of just a little bit of a banter with journalists can also work, because they're trying to get you to become really nervous, to get really anxious. But we're confident that we have the correct information with us, and we've got the right statistics with us. But ultimately, we've got the right principles and the right values that around our campaign. And that brings me to the first point that's here about care for our participants. Especially now that the general election is happening, we have been receiving a lot of more active requests from journalists wanting to speak to members of our community about how would they vote, who would they vote for, why do they want to have the right to vote. And that's something that, on one hand, I really do want to provide that our participants with that media opportunity, and we'll strengthen the campaign by having more voices and by having more intersectional voices, so that we're showing the variety of needs and interests in participating in the political system. However, as some of you may have encountered in the past, for some of members of our community that are coming from vulnerable backgrounds, having that interaction with journalists can be really triggering, or it can actually damage their own immigration application, for example. So one thing that I really emphasize internally in our team before we speak to any of the members of our community about whether they want to speak to a journalist is that we have, as an organization, we have a really clear understanding with the journalist on what they're going to do with that story, how they're going to approach the interaction with our participant. If the participant requests anonymity, that's actively going to be respected. And we try to get as much information as possible from them before we put them in contact. And sometimes that might have to mean, again, that we ignore a journalist, because not necessarily every media interaction will be a positive one if we don't believe that they're going to be respecting our core values and our participants. And at the end of the day, we come back to affirming that this is our home and we want to have the active participation in it. Thank you. And I'm going to pass over to Sonia now.
Amazing. Thank you so much. This has been, yeah, so powerful, and just, yeah, I guess just interesting for me as well to learn from both of you. So I can tell you a little bit about yeah, what I do. So I founded a company called Tala Thrive last year. We're a mental health platform that matches you to therapists and coaches who understand your culture, language, or religion. So culturally competent care, because you shouldn't have to pay to educate the therapist. So a little bit about me, if we go to the next slide. Thank you. So yeah, I'm Australian born and raised from Melbourne, and I've lived in 7 countries now. I spent 6 years in the Nordics recently, so Stockholm and Copenhagen. And my parents are from Malaysia, and we have Indian and mixed heritage. I studied psychology at university, but very quickly moved into the startup ecosystem. So I worked in venture capital, investing in tech companies, and running yeah, impact accelerator programs for Danske Bank in Copenhagen. Been lecturing in a university here out in Oxford for entrepreneurship. So that's most of my kind of professional background. But kind of for me growing up, like, I had a lot of cultural identity issues. So things like, you know, I wouldn't really feel properly Australian because I would get asked like, oh, where are you from? Be like, well, I'm Aussie. I was like, well, where are you really from? And you're like, oh, that question. And, you know, I was born and raised in Australia. But yeah, I'd go back to Malaysia then, and Malaysians would be like, well, you're not Malaysian, you're Australian. It's like, well, great. Like, where do I fit in? And so that was kind of quite a common occurrence, I would say. And then I would try and go to a therapist and, you know, say some of the stuff my parents were doing, and their response was, oh, well, you should cut them out of your life. It's not okay what they're doing. I was like, look, they're Asian parents. Like, they don't have boundaries. They feel like they own you. Like, their expectations are ridiculous. It's not super uncommon. And I'm not going to cut them out of my life for that. And so the kind of response I was getting was really not understanding the kind of cultural background that I had. And so that was a bit of a struggle. And then when I moved to Stockholm, I experienced a lot of racism, and it was the first time that I'd experienced racism to that degree before. So one of the kind of instances where, you know, I'll talk to you about shortly as to the issues that we had online. But basically I was explaining where I experienced the most racism. I've lived in 7 countries, and this is where I experienced the most racism, was in Stockholm. And I went in for an asthma check, so I didn't look sick. And the nurse said to me, she's like, you're the dirty one here, look at you. And I was like, sorry, what? Like, I was like, maybe she said something in Swedish that I didn't understand. I was just a bit like struck by it. And she repeated it word for word. And I was like, okay, like, we're clearly not backing down from this. So after those type of instances, and, you know, I had a great job. I was living in the nicest place in Stockholm, and which then also meant it was a very white privileged place, suburb. And so I obviously stuck out, which also then meant that I was dressing up well to go to the supermarket around the corner, so I wasn't said something to. And obviously just not a way to live your life. And so I then quite quickly moved to Copenhagen. Well, not quickly, but 4 years later, because obviously visa things and all that. But I, in that kind of period, basically was like, okay, I need to speak to a therapist and help me process some of this because it keeps happening. And I'm kind of stuck there. And it was around COVID times where it got really bad. And yeah, obviously stuck there for visa reasons, and Australia shut its borders, which was fun. And so a friend recommended an American woman specifically because she might understand racism better than maybe a white Swedish person would. And it was around the same time as like Black Lives Matter. So yeah, I was like, okay, that makes sense. Like I went to her and basically paid the hour to educate her about racism. It's like, my friends can ask me these questions and I don't need to pay for it. So yeah, got really frustrated there. And then obviously then started, talking to my friends that had a different cultural background, but were based in the Western world, and was like, well, what do you do about this? And have you experienced any of this? And then there's obviously a lot of things that people of color in general face that are slightly different. So is that racism, cultural identity issues, generational trauma, interracial couples. My partner's white Danish. There's a lot of learning there, mostly from his side. But colorism, preferring people of lighter skin to darker skin, etc. So a lot of these topics is obviously what I personally talk about because it's the reason why I built the company, but also, what our company talks about. So yeah, obviously I have been on a lot of podcasts, openly talking about my story, my experiences, and then as well as Talo Thrive as a company, putting out information there in terms of, how do you deal with racist comments? Because to be honest, I get a lot less than my Black male friends get it, to be honest. So it does happen quite often, and it's kind of, we talk a lot about, how do we deal with this, or cultural identity issues, or any of those things. So obviously not a fun topic to personally talk about. However, I think it's good because people then resonate with the problem and they don't feel alone. So I did like one post on LinkedIn just talking about my story and why I built the company. And I had about 120 inbox messages from people telling me their story and telling me why they need our company and our mental health platform. So we are the only one in Europe matching based on culture, language, or religion, which I think is crazy because there are so many generalist mental health platforms, but then also ones that match females to other females, or the queer community, or different demographics. So that's kind of where it is. And if we go to the next slide, I'll kind of talk about the issues that we faced. So this is a snippet that went up from a podcast that I did, and the guy that interviewed me did a snippet of it for 30 seconds, put it on TikTok, and within 24 hours got about 800 comments. And I don't have TikTok, or at the time I didn't. So he basically messaged me and was like, hey, just so you know, like, this has happened. Maybe you want to look at it and let me know, like, if you want me to take it down. And to be honest, like, I've faced a lot of adversity in my life, and I think a lot of people that have, then I kind of look at and go, okay, like, what could come up, like anticipate any issues that could come up so you can kind of like deal with that in advance. To be honest, and probably quite naively, I did not expect this. And so that was something that I really got taken back by, especially because previous to me doing the company, I'm a very private person online. So I had 2 posts on Instagram. One of them was food, and it was a private account. And then obviously I kind of made everything public because it's the best thing for the company. But yeah, obviously that everyone just kind of thought I was lying about that instance that happened in Sweden that I openly talked about. And obviously, if you listen to the whole podcast, I talk about the fact that I never said anything bad about Sweden as a whole. I just said this is where I experienced the most amount of racism, and this was my experiences. But, you know, it can happen in my hometown in Melbourne, like it can happen anywhere. It's just more like how we deal with it. But obviously this was a 30-second snippet. So at that point, it was like, okay, well, one, it's that this is not the company anymore. This is me individually. Like, this is attacking me as a person. And you can see things like cry little girl and like she must be schizophrenic and like she's clearly lying, blah, blah, blah. Like, I think a lot of people just didn't believe that this would happen in Sweden, maybe, whatever it is. And so to be completely honest, it was like I was very taken back by it. I read it at like 12 p.m. in the middle of the day. And as a tech founder, I have 10, 12 meetings a day, every day. And so I kind of, went into one of the member spaces that I work from, and I just saw a friend and I was like, I just need a hug because I have like 6 meetings to go after this and I need to like pull myself together. So to be honest, very taken back. And I kind of came home that night and was just like, and, you know, discussed it with my partner and was like, what do I do? Do I take it down? Because like, I'm gonna have to keep talking about this stuff. And I think that's when I really thought about it and was like, you know what, like I am the face of the company. All of these issues is why I've built the company. So I think for me, I had to take, it's basically, I said, no, we're going to leave it up. And to be honest, now it's like, push it, like push this to media because this is a joke. And to be honest, they're proving why a mental health platform is needed for this demographic. Like you're proving my point. So yeah, I basically was like, keep it up. I'm going to keep talking about this. And I think now it's just, I've realized that if I am going to keep talking about this, then I'm going to get this and worse. And I think that is just for me, a personal thing that I've had to accept going forward. But yeah, I think, you know, having that kind of, my marketing person, we're a very small team. We just started last year and it's a tech startup. And, you know, so I discussed this with my marketing, person. It was like, okay, this is going to keep happening. And now we need to have things in place. And like, how do we deal with this? And this kind of, comms crisis. And so now, you know, we've gone over like certain situations of what could happen or certain comments that could happen and how do we deal with it? Because obviously this was a very last minute thing when I was like, oh my God, like this has happened. Now we need to like deal with it. But now we know, okay, this can happen again. So how do we put these things in place to deal with it? So and I think, you know, with what's been said earlier is that we've also had so much positive things and even in that's definitely what keeps me going and is why we do what we do. So that's kind of my story. I think, you know, I'm still learning and that's why it's super nice to kind of hear from everyone else here. I think we're in a different place where it's a tech company rather than the charity, of course. But then also I think what could be interesting to note as well is that this is kind of publicly on social media, but I think what you also don't see is a lot of the investor calls that I have. And I think a lot of you also kind of, you know, have to raise money for the charities. And I think, you know, take those calls and whatnot. That has also been a real struggle, to be completely honest. And that's kind of more closed doors type of thing. So that's also where I've had to realize like, okay, like I've had to hang up on investors because it's been like horrible, like where they like equate, you know, rape to like, you know, basically like why can't, if someone has been, I had this from an investor, I don't understand why can't a white therapist educate themselves about this. I don't understand the need if someone's been raped before, the therapist doesn't need to be raped themselves to be able to support them. So what's the difference here? I was just like, whoa, like there's no way I want you as an investor. So I was just like, yeah, like one, don't say that to a female founder. Like, and also like if that's the first thing that comes to your mind, like just so bad. So I just said, you know, if this is your level of education here, I think we're done. And just like hang up. But you know, I think you just need to kind of yeah, with a lot of this stuff, I guess, develop tough skin and just go, okay, this is not, I'm not going to engage in this anymore. And that's kind of where you draw the line. So I think, yeah, it's also publicly what everyone sees like this, but it's also a lot privately that I have to deal with almost on a daily basis, especially now when we're fundraising. Or the idea that they think they know racism and they're just like, oh, well, this is not a thing. It's like, because you've never experienced it, doesn't mean it's not a thing, with a lot of other things as well, right? So yeah, I think that's mostly it. Happy to answer any questions.
Amazing, Sonia. Thank you so much. I just want to echo what a lot of people have been saying in the chat about how sorry we are that you've all been through some of these experiences, and just massive solidarity with you, and thank you for talking about it today, because even just sharing your experience is so helpful for everybody on the call, to think about what we might come up against and how we can prepare for that. So thank you so much. Really appreciate that. So if you have a question for our panelists, then please put it in the Q&A. I'm going to try and work through some of them now. Oh, good. We're all back on screen. That's great. We're just missing Lara, I think. So the first question is from Dan. In the planning stage of crisis comms, Becky, I think this refers to the checklist that you provided. Do you do the best worst case scenario in advance, or do you, when you come up against something, you start thinking about which way this situation could go?
Yeah. I guess the answer is both, but I would recommend that the best worst case scenario planning happens in advance. One of the best ways to do it is to workshop it, get your team together, and have half a day of really thinking through all the different elements of your work and all the potential scenarios that may play out and how you might want to handle it.
Excellent. Thank you, Becky. I really appreciate that. Rachel has also asked, so this could be for any of our panelists actually. If you choose not to respond to a troll, how do you best decide whether you just remove the post or you leave a comment? Like, how do you take it down and be accused of like against free criticism about free speech? Do you leave it there? I mean, I think all of you have touched on that a little bit, but maybe you could just give us a brief answer. Heather, would you like to answer that one? Because I think you have quite clear guidelines about how you engage and how you don't.
Yes, so I mean, for us, our number one priority, we've also, well, they're, young people looking to access our service who are struggling with their mental health do not need to type our name in and see abuse. So we have just a zero tolerance policy that all abuse is blocked. We don't engage with it. We don't boost it. Or where there's misinformation, like I say, we'll then just put a post on our page with the correct information on so that they can see that. In terms of, because people say about freedom of speech, we're not stopping that person saying that. They can say it on their own page. They just don't get to say it on ours. So they absolutely have the freedom to write whatever they like on their own platform, but they don't have a right for us to promote it. And that's where the line is for us. So, but like I say, disagreement, discussion, really healthy. We do lots of that. I did mention to someone else in the chat that actually we did a full day conference recently, our intersections conference, that was looking at how all the intersecting identities as to, because people obviously have faith beliefs, have cultural beliefs, have LGBT identities, and how all of that interacts. We can have really interesting discussions about that, but ultimately it's about going, this is my experience, yours may be different, and that's absolutely fine. But, attacks aren't.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And thank you for the answers you've been leaving in the chat. So I appreciate you getting to all those.
Can I add a little bit extra just to that point? So one of the things that we do is we categorize the comments that are being made, and we try and understand whether it's a bot, in which case they'll be blocked or deleted. If it's a troll, again, it depends on the circumstances. We might block them. If it's a supporter who has a genuine concern because they've seen a media story somewhere that has, got something wrong, then we will engage with them. So we look at them, we see how influential they are, and then we'll tailor the response accordingly.
That's really interesting. Thanks, Becky, for adding that. That's great. one of questions from an anonymous attendee, but they have asked, Lara, maybe you'd be able to take this one. How do you get buy-in from your management and your board to prioritize this type of reputational risk in advance? Like, have you found it easy to work with your senior management team, or have you had any pushback where, oh, well, we'll deal with it when we get to it? What kind of response have you had, and how do you bring everyone along with you?
Well, so the senior management is me internally in the organization, but our board of directors, we've from the beginning, I've prioritized getting board members that have lived experience of migration, so all of them understand these issues. They've somehow experienced it themselves. We have someone that has a bit more media experience. We've had people that have, are organizers, so they work with migrant communities, encouraging them to participate in local democracy as well. So everyone in our organization already comes with that understanding of the importance of safeguarding vulnerable members of our community when it comes to any aspect of our work. So we've been really keen to develop our safeguarding policies, and unfortunately we've had one funder that has supported us in developing these, so that we're taking that preventative approach. However, there have been things that have happened before we had policies in place. As I said, we are a small and new organization, so some things we've just had to adapt to, and like for example, remove a post that mentioned someone's name when they started getting abuse and they had an immigration application pending with the Home Office and got really scared. Although in theory you are allowed to comment on national issues or local issues and it shouldn't affect your immigration application, but of course people sometimes get afraid of that. So we have had to do some urgent reactions as well.
Oh, wonderful. Oh, yeah, I'm off mute. I thought I'd muted myself by accident. Thank you, Lara. Thank you. And Sonia, I'm just going to take one more question. If we don't get to all of your questions, we will try and follow up afterwards by email. So rest assured that we will get to everybody by email. But Sonia, perhaps just one last one for you. How do you use any tools in terms of monitoring social media? And someone's asked, like, how do you really prepare? Do you have an Excel sheet somewhere where you've tried to think about what responses, what physically does this response look like so that everybody can find it when they need it?
Yeah, so it actually wasn't the most fun exercise because basically we have like almost like an FAQ doc where we kind of came up with what are some of the questions or comments that we could get, and then our response to it. So yeah, obviously not a fun thing to go, hey, this person could write this awful thing or like question you on this. And then obviously had to ask a lot of people because it's also like, how do we come up with some of this stuff? But that's kind of what we've done. Obviously we can't cover everything and we'll probably have to just deal with it when it comes, but hopefully what we've written now in this doc and the answers are kind of, yeah, you can kind of edit them a little bit here and there for certain ones that come up. But of course, I think, you know, if something really bad does come up that we're not aware of or we don't have an answer to, then it's going to be for us as a smaller organization, jumping on a quick call with a couple of the members of the team, especially marketing, and going, this has just happened. We don't have a playbook for this. What do we do? But I think everyone, I mean, obviously it hurts personally, but I think as a organization, especially focused on mental health, and that's all what we do. I think everyone has to have quite a clear head around this and go, okay, yeah, this might hit at me personally, but how do we deal with this? Because my initial reaction for those TikToks was actually I wrote something up to go back with them at, in a nice way, like just being like, not nice, but very like factual kind of. But I actually never posted it because I just don't think that would have helped. And so I wrote it up that night and was like, I'm going to sleep on it. And then the next morning decide if I post it or not, and then discuss with my marketing person. Was like, nah. So yeah, we have a doc around it, and then kind of just coming into it going, okay, let's breathe. Let's take breaks if we need to. Clear head. How do we respond to this?
Oh, great. Thank you. Thank you, Sonia. We're just going to wrap up now, and we're just going to share that poll that we shared in the beginning that asked how confident do you feel dealing with negative attention? And it would be really interesting to see how you feel now, having listened to these amazing case studies. I'm just so thrilled that you joined us today. Thank you to all our speakers. If you could just vote now, and then we'll just have a look and see if we've moved the dial slightly, and hopefully we have given you some strategies and some tips on how to prepare. So would you mind sharing the results? Oh, that's great. So I feel like we've moved a few people towards the more confident end. I'm going to hand back over to Amy now from NCVO. Thank you again to our panelists, and thank you to you for coming here, and happy Small Charities Week.
Thank you so much, Jade, and a huge thank you to all of our amazing speakers. It was very moving, and I'm sure everybody got some really practical takeaways as well. We've just got some further support and guidance here on the screen. I'm not going to try and run through that because we are running kind of to time now, but these slides will be sent out afterwards. But I'd just like to remind everybody as well, because I saw lots of great things being shared in the chat, that you can save the chat as well. If you click on the 3 dots at the top of the chat, you can save that, because I know Heather in particular shared some really great responses in there as well. We're just going to have a quick snap feedback poll, which is up on your screen now. I know people need to leave, but we really do value this. We take your feedback very seriously, and it helps us to plan webinars like this. So there are 2 questions there. When you close the event today, you will also get a slightly longer poll that comes up. Sorry, not poll, a survey. Again, it will take you 5 minutes, if that, and we really do appreciate the feedback. We take it back on board, and we are planning now for webinars over the next year, so could really do with that feedback. I'll be planning some of those, so personally, I would really like that feedback. It'd be very helpful. Thank you, everybody. Great to see the responses. Fantastic. And just the final thing from me, big thank you again. I'm sure you all agree, and I've seen some wonderful comments in the chat, which is so lovely to see. Huge thank you to Jade, our chair, and our speakers, Sonia, Lara, Heather, and Becky, as well as Chanel and Lara from NCVO for their support. Quick QR code on the screen there if you would like to join NCVO or find out a little bit more about NCVO membership. You can scan that using your mobile phone. But on that note, I think it's time for us to wrap up. Enjoy the final 2 days of Small Charity Week, and hope to see you at another webinar soon. Thank you very much, everybody.